morning, everyone. This year's theme is 2020 Spiritual Vision. Our theme for September is Facing the Fear. Life's uncertainties and challenges can test our faith. This month, we draw upon a vibrant and active faith and reap the benefits of a spirit-centered life. Today's topic is a question of faith. New Thought mystic Emma Curtis Hopkins wrote in Scientific Christian Mental Practice, page 75, "We are to have faith in God," said Jesus. "Thus we have faith in good, providing life conditions just right for us, no matter how much evil there seems to be operating against us. God is life. Thus, we are to have confidence in life as the outcome. Life will win." Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase." Let's speak Ernest Holmes' affirmation of faith together. "I live in the faith that there is a presence and power greater than I am that nurtures and supports me in ways I could not even imagine." And now I'd like to introduce Reverend Dr. Kathleen in her presentation of the message, A Question of Faith.
There's a story of a woman who wished to test the idea of having faith as small as a mustard seed, as being sufficient to manifest a great good. And she heard that kind of faith can move mountains. So she noticed she had a mountain outside of her window, and she decided to spend the entire night, and she did. She spent the entire night cultivating faith through prayer. And the next morning, she opened her window and looked outside, and she said, "Well, the mountain is still there, just as I expected." So I think what that little story is all about is really to remind us the power of expectation, the power that it plays in this thing called faith. And also, in a few moments, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this idea of a mustard seed, this metaphysical symbol that Jesus used in his teaching. But for now, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the things that get in the way of faith and some of the situation that we're witnessing in the world right now. Most of us have heard of attention deficit disorder, ADD. And because I have some members of my family who have been diagnosed with that, I've come to see that it's just part of their spiritual perfection. It's the way in which they operate and their unique way of being in the world that has a lot of gifts and talents that go along with it. But this other thing I want to talk about is an FDD, a faith deficit disorder. As you heard Candace mention, we all actually inherently have faith, but it's been covered over by social conditioning, by experience, and that kind of thing. So in many ways, there is a faith disorder in this that we're seeing throughout the world. And what it is, it's an addiction to fear. It's a tendency to focus on what we are afraid will happen. And because we know how the creative law of mind operates, what we focus on, what we fear, tends to happen. So it's really important that we don't get caught up in the vicious cycle of fear that we read about in the newspaper or that we hear about sometimes in conversations with others. That we instead continue to return to the truth. So what are some of the signs of this faith deficit disorder? Boredom, absence of passion, an absence of direction, or a sense that there is no meaning to all of this, that things are just happening randomly, irritability, fatigue, chronic low-level diseases, an inclination to have addictions, and self-numbing in front of the TV. So what is the treatment for this thing called faith deficit disorder? The treatment is to have this thing called, to choose this thing called faith. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but I first want to define this thing called faith. Ernest Holmes defines it as a mental attitude, basically a very optimistic attitude. And in spiritual terminology, faith is a belief in the presence of an invisible principle and law which directly responds to us, which is what I was just talking about. That's why our focus is continually this universal law responding to what we focus on. So it's really important that we are mindful of where our mind is going. You know, God does not play favorites. When we ask ourselves, well, why is this person getting their prayers answered and this other person isn't? Or why is this prayer that I offer being answered and this other prayer not? And it all goes back to what we just heard in that story about the woman who was cultivating her faith and wanting to move the mountain outside her window. It's what do you expect? What is your perception of the possibilities that are available to you? And here's the thing, because God does not play favorites, God is available equally to each and every one of us, and that means the entire kingdom of God, the field of all possibilities and all potentialities is what that means. And the same law is available to us. So the same good and the same law of God is available to all of us. So our beliefs determine whether prayers are answered or not. It is done unto us as we believe. We've heard that one many times. So we must cultivate faith, an affirmative mental attitude toward life. How do we do that? Well, I love the story that Edwene Gaines tells. She says when somebody comes up to her and says, I would love to have faith just like you have, she says, well, then choose it. She says, choose it. She says, that's all I ever did. I just chose to believe in God. I chose to believe in the power of a universal law. I chose to believe that there is one source, one life, one power that is for me, that supply, but I know that is a choice. It's something that we can choose. So the next time you find yourself wishing you had the faith of Jesus or the faith of Edwene Gaines or the faith of Gandhi, remember it begins with a choice. You choose it. You choose it in your thought. You choose to direct your thought in the direction of truth. And so this is where the mustard seed symbology comes in. In metaphysical terms, and Jesus was a great metaphysician. He's told parables with the intention of planting seeds in consciousness. And so a mustard seed, it's so tiny. I don't know if you've ever seen one before. They're teeny tiny little seeds, and out of those seeds come really large plants. And in truth, it's, when we think of any seed, the seed of an oak tree, when you see the size of the seed and you imagine the thing that comes out of it, it just kind of blows your mind when you think about it. So what this symbolizes is that a small thought of truth planted in consciousness develops that consciousness. And when you keep planting seeds of truth in consciousness over and over and over again, it begins to expand the abiding place in consciousness for higher thought. and for greater possibility. Isn't that beautiful? So this idea of a tiny seed, it's a seed thought, planting seeds in consciousness. And we can choose to do that. Our method of prayer, spiritual mind treatment, that Candace so beautifully demonstrated, is planting seeds in consciousness of spiritual truth. They are statements of truth. And that leads us then to the idea that Jesus said. He said something very powerful. He said, "These things I do, and even greater things you shall do." He was telling us the same potential resides in us that resided in him. The potential to heal others, to heal ourselves, to heal others, to be a healing presence in the world, to be able to transform things in an instant. We all have that capacity, whether we believe it or not. And so the first step is to choose to believe that. I invite you right in this moment to choose to have the same faith that Jesus had. His faith was rooted in oneness consciousness, realizing that he was totally aligned. He is totally aligned with God, that he is God individualized. And so are we. So let us choose it. Active faith. There's a saying in the Bible that says faith without works is dead. So this means that faith is not a passive thing, but it's a very vibrant, alive, and active thing in consciousness. It's an active energy. It's the activity of the divine operating in us, through us, and as us. In us, through us, and as us. Ernest Holmes called it active faith. He said, which is an inner knowing that God works in each and every one of us. And active faith is a real thing once we cultivate it. It does not die. We may have moments when we lose sight of it, in a moment of stress. But because we've cultivated it, we're soon drawn back into taking a stand in faith. Anybody notice that? Sometimes, something doesn't work out the way we thought it was, and we may have a moment where we think we lack faith, but then we go, oh, well, wait a minute, and then we bring ourselves back to the spiritual truth. Edwin Gaines, in the 4 spiritual laws of prosperity, described faith in this way, and I love this. Again, this is a beautiful metaphor. She said, when you have faith and do the thing anyway, when you have fear and do the thing anyway, when you have fear and do the thing anyway, you're holding on to the hand of God. Since you don't know what you're doing, you're sure glad that God does. So many times, she said, I've crawled way, way out onto the limb of faith and prayed that God would grow a tree under me. And God always has. Have you ever noticed that on fruit trees, all the faith is at the end of all the fruit is at the end of the limb. All the fruit is at the end of the limb. It's not up close to the trunk. So you have to be willing to walk way out onto the little thin limb in order to get the fruit. And the same is true about God. If you wait for guarantees before you step out there on a limb, it's not going to work. So this is such a beautiful analogy of how powerful it is to take the first step, as Martin Luther King said, even though you can't see the full staircase. Faith and knowing go hand in hand. They have this beautiful dance that they do together. Faith is a deep knowing that all is well despite the appearances, that all is working together for good despite the appearances. And when we see faith is rewarded by manifestation, then we have this beautiful awareness that becomes a knowing that this is